There is a mouse that has earned more money than most countries on Earth. A theme park that welcomes more visitors every year than the entire population of Australia. A studio whose name has become a byword for childhood itself. But the man on the statue, the one holding Mickey's hand outside the castle, did not build any of it alone. Standing just behind him, almost always out of frame, is his older brother, the one who mortgaged his own house, missed his own health, and gave up his own retirement, so his brother's impossible dreams could survive contact with reality. This is the story of Walt and Roy Disney, the dreamer and the man who paid for the dream. Walter Elias Disney was born on the 5th of December 1901 in Chicago, Illinois, the fourth of 5 children. His brother Roy Oliver Disney, born 8 years earlier, in 1893, was already old enough to remember a very different childhood by the time Walt could talk. Their father, Elias, was a strict, restless man who moved the family constantly, chasing one failed venture after another. In 1906 he moved them to a farm in Marceline, Missouri, a small town that Walt would later describe as the happiest place of his childhood, and the direct inspiration for Main Street USA at Disneyland. The farm failed within a few years, worn down by drought and Elias's declining health. In 1911, the family moved again to Kansas City, where Elias bought a newspaper delivery route for the Kansas City Star. Walt and Roy woke before dawn, in freezing Missouri winters, to deliver papers on foot, for no pay of their own. Their father kept every cent the boys earned. It was grueling, thankless work, and it bonded the two brothers in a way that would define the rest of both their lives. Roy, older, steadier, and more patient than his volatile father, often looked out for his younger brother on those routes, a habit of quiet protection he would never really abandon. Walt hated the newspaper route and found his real escape in drawing. He took Saturday art classes at the Kansas City Art Institute while still a boy, showing an early, obvious talent that had nothing to do with the discipline his father tried to instill in him through hard labor. When the First World War broke out, Roy joined the United States Navy. Walt, still too young to enlist, lied about his age and joined the Red Cross Ambulance Corps instead, serving in France after the armistice. Both brothers came home changed, and both were, in their own ways, ready to build something of their own. Walt returned to Kansas City and found work in commercial art, where he met a talented young animator named Ub Iwerks. Together they studied the emerging craft of cell animation, and in 1922, Walt founded his own studio, Laugh-O-Gram, producing short animated fairy tales. It was a creative success and a financial disaster. By 1923, Laugh-O-Gram was bankrupt, and Walt was so broke he was reportedly eating cold beans out of a can and sleeping in his office. With almost nothing left, Walt boarded a train for Hollywood, California, with a single finished reel of film, $40, and a plan. He moved in with his Uncle Robert. And a few miles away, in a veterans hospital in Sawtell, his brother Roy was recovering from tuberculosis, a disease he had likely contracted during his Navy service. Walt visited Roy in that hospital and made his pitch: leave the hospital, forget a quiet, safe career, and help him build an animation studio from absolutely nothing. Roy, still recovering, agreed. He lent Walt $200 of his own savings. On the 16th of October 1923, the two brothers founded the Disney Brothers Studio in their uncle's garage, a date the company still recognizes as its founding day. The arrangement that followed would define the entire Disney empire for the next 4 decades. Walt would dream, draw, and direct. Roy would manage the money, negotiate the contracts, and keep the studio alive through every crisis the business threw at them, and there were many. Their first real success was a series called The Alice Comedies, blending live action with animation, distributed by Margaret Winkler. In 1927, Walt created a character called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit for Universal Pictures. Oswald was a hit. And then, in 1928, Walt discovered a lesson that would harden him for the rest of his career. Because he did not own the rights to his own character, Universal simply took Oswald away, and hired away most of his animation staff in the process. Devastated but undeterred, Walt and Ub Iwerks created a new character on the train ride home, a mouse. Roy insisted, this time, that the studio would own everything it created outright. Mickey Mouse debuted in Steamboat Willie on the 18th of November, 1928, one of the first cartoons ever synchronized with sound. It made Mickey, and the Disney name, famous almost overnight. Through the 1930s, Roy kept the studio financially afloat, negotiating distribution deals and merchandise licensing that turned Mickey Mouse into a genuine commercial empire, while Walt kept pushing creative boundaries nobody else in the industry dared to touch, releasing dozens of silly symphonies shorts and refining the studio's animation technique with every release. The biggest gamble came in 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first full-length cel-animated feature film ever attempted by any studio in the world. The industry mocked it before release, calling it Disney's folly, certain that audiences would never sit through 90 minutes of cartoon. It cost around $1.5 million, an almost unthinkable sum for an animated film at the time, and the budget kept climbing as Walt refused to compromise on quality. Roy had to personally convince skeptical bankers, again and again, to extend the studio's credit, at one point walking into the Bank of America's offices with unfinished reels of the film just to prove the project was real. Snow White premiered in December 1937 to a standing ovation and became the highest-grossing film of its era. It saved the studio, and it proved, for the first time, that the Disney Brothers partnership could survive almost anything. The brothers used the profits to build a new, larger studio in Burbank. But the good times didn't last uninterrupted. The Second World War forced the studio into government training and propaganda films to survive, and in 1941 an animators' strike, driven by pay disputes and long hours, left lasting scars on the company culture and on Walt personally. The studio rebuilt through the late 1940s and into television, and then Walt turned to an idea almost everyone around him thought was insane: a theme park. Roy, ever the realist, was deeply skeptical of the cost. But Walt secured financing in part through a groundbreaking television deal with ABC, and Disneyland opened in Anaheim, California, on the 17th of July 1955. It became an instant cultural phenomenon, and proof, once again, that Walt's instincts, backed by Roy's discipline, were worth betting on. By the 1960s, Walt had set his sights on an even larger project in Florida, a much bigger park and experimental city he called Epcot. He never got to see it. Walt Disney died of lung cancer on the 15th of December, 1966, leaving the Florida project unfinished and the company without the man who had always been its creative center. Roy, who was already planning his own retirement after nearly 5 decades of managing his brother's ambitions, made a decision that defined the rest of his life. He postponed retirement entirely, at nearly 70 years old, to personally oversee and finish his brother's final, unfinished dream in Florida. He came out of a semi-retirement he had barely begun to enjoy, took direct control of the project, and insisted, over the objections of company executives who wanted a cleaner corporate name, that the new Florida park be named Walt Disney World, not simply Disney World, specifically so the public would never forget whose vision it truly was. Walt Disney World opened on the 1st of October, 1971. Roy Disney had done what he had always done, quietly finished what his brother started, and made sure his brother got the credit. Roy Oliver Disney died just weeks later, on the 20th of December, 1971, only months after watching the gates of Walt Disney World open to the public. He had given his brother 60 years of financial discipline, personal sacrifice, and quiet, unglamorous devotion, and he outlived him by barely 5 years, just long enough to finish the job. Today, the Walt Disney Company is one of the largest media and entertainment corporations on the planet. Walt Disney's name is on the studio, the parks, and the legend. But without Roy, the man who mortgaged houses, negotiated with skeptical bankers, and gave up his own retirement to finish what his brother started, there would have been no studio left to carry that name at all. If you've made it this far into this story, you already know you love this kind of content. the real history, the real people, the versions of these stories that the documentaries never quite tell. So subscribe. Because every week on this channel, we go deep into one great life, or in this case, two, intertwined so completely that neither could have built what they built alone. Next week, another story of ambition, sacrifice, and the price of building something that outlives you. Don't miss it.